Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today we are going to be discussing a fantastically folkloric UFO contact case which occurred in France in August of 1967. And before anyone shouts "Little Green Men," I will have you know that the case in question was billed in the Flying Saucer Review as Encounter with Devils. Yes, you absolutely heard me right, devils. We'll get to that in just a second, because before we begin here, I would like to direct all interested parties to the Anomaly Archive's online fundraising streamathon event. It's being held to raise money for a new location for the archive, so it is an incredibly worthy cause, and anyone able to donate, please consider it. The event itself is free and includes tons of amazing speakers live every Saturday through the end of 2020, and they have archives available of all previous speakers, including yours truly. The link is in the description, so definitely check it out. So, back to the UFO and the devils. August 29th of 1967. Two children, Francois, who was 13, and his sister Anne-Marie, and their little dog too, had been tasked with watching some cows grazing in a nearby meadow outside of the small village of Cussac in France. They passed the time by playing cards until about 10:30 in the morning, when the cows up and decided that they wanted to cross over this low stone wall into a neighboring field. So Francois got up to lead them back to where they were supposed to be, and when he did so, he noticed that across the road, behind some hedges, there were these four children whom he didn't recognize. So he climbed on top of some stones to get a better look at these guys, and as he did so, he realized that not only were these some very strange children indeed, but they were accompanied by a large, luminous silver sphere, which was so bright that it was painful to look at. The sphere in question was about 6 to 7 feet in diameter, and here's something very interesting. Both children claimed that there were no details on the surface of the object. However, Anne-Marie said that she noticed what, for lack of a better word, appeared to be like landing gear underneath the object. She claimed that she saw 3 or 4 long straight legs, which were ended in round shoes. So, however, she said that they vanished when the machine was in flight. She didn't see them retract into the machine or anything like that. They were simply there one minute, gone the next. And this is just one of 2 points in the story where the children differed on details observed. Now on to the little beings themselves. There were 4 of them standing in front of this luminous sphere, and they ranged in heights between 3 to 4 feet tall, with the tallest entity holding onto some sort of object which was described as looking like a mirror. Now they were this completely shiny black, a texture which Francois said looked kind of like silk. And the kids couldn't tell if this was the entity itself or some sort of perfectly fitted, seamless suit that they were wearing, which in that case would have been over the face as well. There was no mention of eyes, mouth, or ears. However, Anne-Marie did claim that she noticed a pointed nose on the 4th entity, and only the 4th entity. And this is the second point in this encounter where the kids' testimony differed. Everything else was perfectly in line. Now, both children attested to the fact that although the heads seemed to be of proportionate size to the bodies, the cranium was pointed. And another weird thing to note is that they claimed that not only were the chins also pointed, but that these things had beards, which were visible on either side of the face and on the chin. While the children didn't notice anything akin to hands on these entities, they said that the arms and legs were exceptionally long and spindly, and that the feet on the 4th figure were webbed. So just to add that on to the long list of very bizarre things about these entities. Now, if that's not weird enough for you, the actions of these little guys just adds to the general strangeness of this encounter. Apparently one of the entities was bending over, almost looked like it was messing around with the soil, while the 4th mirror-holding entity was waving its non-hands around like it was gesturing to its companions. Then all of a sudden, the first one, furthest to the left of the object, rose up into the air, kind of turned over mid-air and dove headfirst into the sphere. The next did the same, as did the 3rd. Then the 4th one rose, dove back to the ground like it was picking something up. Francois thought that maybe it had dropped its mirror, and then disappeared into the sphere just like its companions had, only by then the sphere had already risen into the air, performing a tight spiral. And as it did so, there was a soft yet piercing whistling type noise, combined with a sound of rushing wind, although the air was still. So after the sphere took off, it made several more circles, while still climbing and growing brighter by the moment. At this point in time, there was a smell of sulfur in the area. Their cows and the neighboring cows gathered close together and started lowing, and the little dog started barking at the object. The sound ceased, and the sphere sped off to the northwest, though Francois and Anne-Marie did not stick around to watch it disappear or fade into the distance or ride off into the sunset, or I guess, well, it wouldn't be the sunset at that time, but you get what I mean. They got the heck out of there, driving the cows home about a half hour earlier than usual. So technically, though, they still did indeed watch this UFO until the cows came home. Now, this is quite a bit already, but wait, there is indeed more. Police were actually called to the scene. The kids involved in this incident were the children of the then mayor of Cussac, and so this incident was taken very seriously, even at a local level. They arrived at the scene some hours later, around 4 o'clock on that same day, and the smell of sulfur was still present, as was this patch of yellow grass, which would normalize by the next day. It was later uncovered that a nearby resident, who in some reports is mentioned as being an off-duty police officer, had been in his barn shifting hay at the time of the incident, and had also heard this strange whistling type noise. Now, those who investigated this case found the children to be very sincere witnesses. Apparently their parents said that they came home in tears and that for 2 nights thereafter, Anne-Marie couldn't sleep. Francois couldn't sleep for 1 night after the incident, though when he came home, for about 15 minutes he had watery eyes. And then every morning, for some time thereafter too, he would wake up with these watery eyes for, again, about 15 minutes. Which, again, this is a feature common in UFO sightings and some cryptid sightings. It was theorized by investigators at the time that this was due to the fact that he had to wear glasses, and that somehow the intense luminosity of the object was compounded by the lenses. They also theorized that this is exactly why he couldn't see some of the finer details that his sister mentioned, such as the landing gear or the pointed nose on the fourth entity. Now again, this is just simply a fantastic case with several very intriguing points. The first thing that stands out is the smell of sulfur. Now, of course, this has been pointed out by many researchers such as John Keel and firmly cemented by Joshua Cutchin in his fantastic book, The Brimstone, Deceit, that sulfur is heavily associated with every different type of paranormal phenomenon, not simply relegated to the fire and brimstone of demonic fame. It's interesting to note, though, that in this case, there was the presence of sulfur, and then these beings were branded as devils. It makes you wonder, kind of, if it hadn't been there, would they have simply been called imps, or even just simply UFO occupants or aliens? But no, this was really branded as the UFO encounter with devils. So again, you almost wonder if the sulfur kind of had something to do with that branding. But interesting too are the discrepancies between the accounts of Anne-Marie and Francois. Now, the differences simply are the pointed nose on the fourth entity and the magical vanishing landing gear. Now, these again were both noticed by Anne-Marie and not observed by Francois. And I guess my question here is, yeah, sure, maybe his eyesight did play into this, but then how is it that he noticed some of the other finer details, such as, the webbed feet of the fourth entity or the beards on the entity's chins? Now again, many paranormal occurrences with shared witnesses will have these slight discrepancies between accounts, and I don't think at all that this means that we should discount those sightings. I think that, in my opinion, this is evidence that these are events that are not totally objective. Though again, in many cases it could simply be observational differences. And two, when I say that events aren't totally objective, I don't mean to say that it's some sort of completely subjective event either. I think that it exists kind of at this weird threshold point, because even, this case is a perfect example. You have this fantastic trace evidence of the yellow grass and the smell of sulfur after the sighting, the outside observer who heard the strange whistling noise, and of course the reactions of the animals at the scene. This all points to something that does happen objectively. Just in mind with these discrepancies, which again are very common not just in this case but other cases as well with the paranormal, you have to wonder if it does almost occur partially in, the subjective subconscious of the observer and partially in objective reality. So one other thing about the landing gear. It was there one moment, gone the next. And so many of these paranormal occurrences, they do almost have these kind of faulty transitions. They lack the steady climb from point A to point B and so on. So again, I think that this is evidence that they aren't occurring totally objectively, in our reality where things tend to lead seamlessly into the other. These things just kind of have these missing gaps, missing time almost. So that is very interesting. Now, the performance of the entities is definitely interesting too. My knee-jerk reaction whenever I hear of these contact encounters is, what are they trying to prove? Most of the time it almost feels like staged for the witness. And this is no exception. The messing around of the soil by the one entity I mean, this comes up time and time again in close encounters with UFOs where entities are seen. And there's a very ET belief that they are taking soil samples back to their home planet. Now, the thing is, several centuries earlier, if we would have seen some sort of bizarre humanoid type entity messing around with the soil, we would have simply considered that, oh, well, that's natural, because the fairies are intrinsically connected to earth, nature, and farming. There was a lot of beliefs about how fairies could influence farming and agriculture for better or worse. And coincidentally enough, too, the inclusion of the herd of cows in this case, it bridges the gap between cattle blight and mutilation, the fairies and the aliens. Now, the whistling, rushing type noise also comes up quite a bit in fairy lore. There were a lot of belief systems that claimed that fairies would travel around in whirlwinds, to the point that in some traditions they were even referred to as fairy winds. And again, this same type of noise, of the rushing type noise, even though the wind is still, or the whistling type noise, has also been observed quite a bit in UFO cases. The object carried by the tallest entity, too, we could speculate on why Francois decided that it was definitely a mirror, as opposed to just saying that it was some sort of reflective or sparkly object. But either way, it calls to mind the Honeycutt encounter from Frogman-haunted Loveland, in which a troop of little grey men had the front man holding onto some sort of sparkling wand or chain. Now, the full bodysuit, the pointed cranium and chin, and the beard also tends more towards descriptions of various type of fairy, goblin, or imp. Now, too, I'm never saying with this that we should revert to the fairy faith and replace all of our motherships with fairy forts. Just that I find it very interesting that there is an unbroken legacy of anomaly throughout all mankind's history that simply masquerades under the newest belief system of that time. So needless to say, this is a truly fantastic case that kind of exists at a crossroads of belief systems. At the time, it was handled by ufologists in a very ufological manner, though the entities themselves, consider it, they were still branded as devils. You can almost see the transition out of the more, the fairy faith or the more occult type belief systems of yesteryear into the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So if you enjoyed this episode on one of ufology's more folkloric cases, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may hold. Till then, you can keep up with me on my Patreon account or check out my website, justanothertinfoilhat.com, to see whatever else I might possibly be doing. For today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.